It's a pretty poorly kept secret that the Allman Brothers Band revered their roadies in the original era in particular. And probably the most notable way we know that, or the most important way we know that, is the back cover of At Fillmore East included their roadies sitting among their gear, including, I'm going to go from the far side, that's Willie Perkins, standing to that side there. Mike Callahan also standing, that's Joe Dan Petty in front of Mike Callahan. Callahan's got his foot up on a road case. And then Kim Payne holding a beer, sort of leaning on Joe Dan Petty. And then right above me, that's Red Dog, the famous, infamous roadie Red Dog that Cameron Crowe featured him in Almost Famous, one of the greatest rock and roll movies in history. And much of the story, actually, or many of his stories, are based on some time with the Allman Brothers. But that's not why I'm talking about the roadies today. The final person I want to mention is Twiggs Linden up top. Twiggs was actually in a mental institution for having murdered a Buffalo club owner over non-payment, and the judge had sent him to the mental institution, basically not guilty by reason of insanity. The time on the road with the Allman Brothers Band had driven him crazy. But anyway, that's the roadies. But what I want to talk about actually is Kim Payne here sitting there with the beer in his hand. And the reason why is I think it's really interesting to me that sometime in the middle 20 teens, Kim's name finally shows up in a songwriting credit for Midnight Rider. And that's the story I want to talk about today. This photo Jim Marshall took, famous rock photographer, took right across the street from Capricorn Studios in Macon. And the studios themselves were not, well, the studios were not in a very good neighborhood, at least at the time. The neighborhood wasn't in really great shape. And the band kept their gear in a warehouse right next to the studio, but it was a very unsecure warehouse. So the roadies, when they were off the road, had to stay in the warehouse to protect the gear from anything. According to Gregg's book, Alan Paul's book, Scott Freeman's book, all of them quoting Gregg and or Kim Payne, the story was Gregg got the song down, was struggling at one point. He had the Midnight Rider lyric, and apparently Kim Payne, I'm quoting this from Scott Freeman's book that came out in the 90s. Gregg came down to the warehouse. He was playing and we were doing a bunch of speed, and he kept going on about this Midnight Rider thing. He was having a time with words, and it was actually getting irritating. Apparently, it's Kim Payne who gives Gregg the lyric, I've gone by the point of caring. Some will bet I'll soon be sharing, which is a really key lyric toward the end of the song. As Gregg wrote in his book, he says, Kim Payne came up with I've gone by the point of caring, which was exactly what I needed. I've gone by the point of caring. Fuck it. And then, some old bet I'll soon be sharing. I've got another buck and I ain't going to let him catch my ass. And then it's just kind of off to the sunset. That's a Gregg quote. Anyway, Gregg gave Kim a piece of his songwriting credit for giving him that line. But Kim, it was something that I don't know that Capricorn honored Phil Walden or his publishing companies honored. I think Kim over the years had to chase down that, it was a 5% stake in the publishing or something like that. But the reason I wanted to tell the story is, I've always been like, when did his name show up on songwriting credit? And it was like 2015 on a CD release of Idlewild South, which is the song that Midnight Rider was originally on. So if you see, it's Robert Kim Payne. If you see his name listed on songwriting credits, it's because he gave Gregg a really, really killer line from Midnight Rider. Long Live the ABB.
Hey y'all, this is part 2 of yesterday's post when I was talking about the songwriting credits on Midnight Rider, and I was talking specifically about Kim Payne here on the back cover of the album, who has now a songwriting credit, a small songwriting credit for providing a line to Gregg. What I forgot to say yesterday was the reason why I set it all up and said that Capricorn Studios was in a pretty rundown neighborhood. He was guarding the studio, but I forgot to connect why Gregg ended up there. And it was basically Gregg had written the song and loved it and was hot to capture the song on tape. So anyway, Twiggs gets a bass. He gives Twiggs a bass and teaches him the da-na-na-na-na-na, that riff part of the bass line of Midnight Rider. Then he says, I had a 12-string guitar and a bass and a drum. So JMO, somehow he finds JMO and sets it up. And then they go to Capricorn Studios. or at Capricorn. I don't exactly know what, but they're in this warehouse or the storage area. And what ends up happening is Gregg's afraid he's going to forget the song. Gregg convinces Kim Payne to break into the studio that he was supposed to be guarding so that they could record and lay down a demo of Midnight Rider. Anyway, so my whole purpose here today was to sort of remember the whole reason Gregg was there and the reason that Kim was involved in this recording is simply because they broke into the studio that Kim was trying to protect. Long live the ABB.